Joining me to talk about all of this is our NBC News team, White House correspondent Vaughn Hillyard, law enforcement and intelligence correspondent Tom Winter, and senior national political reporter Sahil Kapur has the latest from Capitol Hill. Vaughn, let's start with you. How significant is it that the president can't seem to make this controversy over Epstein go away, especially considering how much fallout there is from his own base?
Right. I think it's notable, Ryan, that this is somebody who does not typically make concessions, and that's what he has done by going and seeking the Department of Justice to go to the court to have the unsealing of the grand jury transcripts from the Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein indictments. Of course, Tom can get into the details of this. That is a far cry from actually calling for the unsealing of a great vast amount of other evidence that would maybe be more revealing of other associates of Jeffrey Epstein and any details that could relate to potentially President Trump himself here. At the same time, this is where the Wall Street Journal article that came out last week suggests that there is, well, not potentially criminal in nature, unflattering substance that could very well exist inside of the Epstein files. But that is where the president here is not, for now more than 2 weeks, been able to push this aside, because for years now, some of his most fervent supporters, one of their key rallying cries has been the idea of putting President Trump back into the White House so that he and his Department of Justice could reveal and unseal all of the Epstein files because of the very serious claims that they make. We know that Jeffrey Epstein, Ryan, had a vast number of victims in very serious cases that Jeffrey Epstein was directly involved in. At the same time, there is another bucket of conspiracy theories that supporters of the president believe that Jeffrey Epstein was a part of here. And so there's a lot to this. At the same time, the president is clearly not able to get this and push this aside.
And to that end, Vaughn, he appears to be frustrated, according to our reporting, that he's the one taking the heat over this instead of the Department of Justice. If this doesn't fade from the headlines soon, I mean, he's been very loyal to Pam Bondi. Could that change?
Right. We have not heard from Pam Bondi taking questions or being out front. It was the president that told his supporters to effectively move along. They've revealed everything that they need to reveal. At the same time, Pam Bondi is very clearly standing in line with the president himself and effectively following his desires in this. He had suggested about unsealing the grand jury transcripts, and that is what the Department of Justice is moving to do. And so in many ways here, the president is surrounded by entities that are looking to defend him. And so I think that for him, that is a very key element to all of this.
Okay, let's move over to Tom Winter. Vaughn, thank you for that. Tom, as we mentioned, the DOJ has a motion to unseal that grand jury transcript. What comes next? Is there any reason to think that the judge will grant that motion?
Well, I think so. I mean, the courts, particularly in the Southern District of New York and the appellate courts, have taken a look at this issue in a case going back to the 1990s, Ryan. And in the course of that, they looked at it and they established really kind of 9 considerations for a judge to think about in order to grant one of these requests, is to unseal something. This is something that has come up over the years with independent people, independent reporters, independent scholars, taking a look at specific individuals or cases and hoping to get more information, particularly when an individual was deceased. And that was the case with the precedent-controlling case that I'm referring to. And so one of the things that the judges and the courts have ruled out here is, or put out there rather, is whether or not federal prosecutors agree with and are moving for the records to be unsealed. And of course, that's exactly what's happening here in the letter from Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche. They're saying that they want the secrecy veil removed. And that's something that the courts overseeing this particular case and in this district has said that the judges should strongly consider. Also looking at the passage of time, whether or not any individuals are deceased or not. Obviously, Jeffrey Epstein, the man we're looking at next to me, is deceased, dead by suicide. And then also whether or not there's a consideration for other witnesses. The Justice Department's already said that they were willing to redact names of victims. So it appears, at least in the initial 4-page filing, that they've addressed some of the court's concerns. They're aware of the precedent. And so I don't think it's a remote possibility at all that some of these records could be unsealed. But newsflash, Ryan, we kind of know what they're already going to say, because it was the type of records, the transcripts, the testimony that came out to lead a grand jury to vote for the indictment of Jeffrey Epstein in the first place, and later Ghislaine Maxwell, who we're looking at on screen. And so the information contained within those indictments are things that we've well known, or in fact, in the case of Maxwell, have seen at a trial that led to her conviction. So as far as any additional parties here, Ryan, it's probably unlikely we're going to glean new information outside of those indictments. Okay,
so and this has been talked about a lot, that this is a pretty narrow request in terms of information, as you rightly point out. So is there any other route the government could take to get more information unsealed?
Well, certainly there have been a number of FOIAs filed over the years. There have been a number of news organizations, including this one, who have asked for documents in the past. The question becomes, given the size and scope of this investigation, it was voluminous, the number of U.S. Attorney's Office and FBI offices that looked at this, how far back are you willing to go, and how many 302s are you willing to, there's the report of an investigation, are you willing to put out there? And then the challenge, as our colleague and legal analyst Chuck Rosenberg wrote about and provided information to us about last week, the challenge on this is that a number of individuals' names are going to come up. For instance, I might say, well, in the course of this conduct, Tom, did you ever work with Ryan Nobles? Sure, I did. But does that mean that Ryan Nobles is somebody who's got a party to whatever case that I'm in, or in fact is involved in any criminality whatsoever? No. So I think that's something that really federal prosecutors and the FBI have to consider here. And there's a lot of people that might not have really anything to do with Jeffrey Epstein, just that their name came up. They may be pulled into an orbit that could really be a challenge for the Justice Department, and as legal experts point out, inherently unfair, Ryan.
Yeah, there's a reason that the Department of Justice and prosecutors don't just make all this information public over the course of an investigation, and you rightly point that out. Tom, thank you for that. Let's go to Capitol Hill now, where Sahil's standing by. So, Sahil, there's been some question over whether there should be a vote on the Hill to push for the release of the Epstein files. Where does that stand?
Well, Ryan, there is an effort by a bipartisan duo, Tom Massey, the Republican, and Ro Khanna, the Democrat, to try to force this vote, to try to get around Speaker Johnson and House Republican leadership with this so-called discharge petition. This tactic rarely succeeds, but this issue has just struck a chord with the Republican base to such a significant degree that there are GOP Trump allies, hardcore MAGA members of the House, who are interested in signing that discharge petition to force this issue because they do want more transparency and they do want the release of some files related to Jeffrey Epstein. Speaker Johnson, however, is determined to try to stop that. Take a listen to what he said.
My belief is we need the administration to have the space to do what it is doing, and if further congressional action is necessary or appropriate, then we'll look at that. But I don't think we're at that point right now because we agree with the president.
So no vote on this resolution before August.
Now, it may not ultimately be up to him, Ryan, but there is some time. This provision, this discharge petition has, there's a ripening period before it can move. Then it has to get signatures and then sit in committee for about 30 days. So the Speaker and the White House have some time to figure this out. But right now, they do still have a problem on their hands.
And this problem could extend into the midterms, right? We went over the poll numbers at the top of our segment. The president may not be running right now, but all of his colleagues in the House are, a good chunk of them in the Senate. When you see this general dissatisfaction by base voters, Republican voters, 49% saying they're dissatisfied with the way the administration is handling the Epstein case, could that be a blowback in the midterms? Could it lead to some of these base voters that they desperately need to just stay home?
It very plausibly could, Ryan. I can think of three distinct problems that the GOP is going to have in the 2026 midterms. The biggest one is that this party is heavily reliant on a coalition of voters who are not really Republican voters, they're Trump voters. They show up when he's on the ballot loyally and reliably. They do not show up on the ballot, they do not show up to vote when he isn't on the ballot, and he can never be on the ballot again. The second problem is Trump's approval has declined. You just showed the numbers, overall where the approval rating is headed. It's on the downward. That includes with independents. So there is already that backlash environment. And finally, the so-called big, beautiful bill, which both parties agree is going to be the defining issue in the midterms, is deep underwater at this time. So you add all of those things together, and the Republicans are they need to be considering what the post-Trump future looks like, how they stitch together a coalition that can win elections when he can no longer be in the picture.
And then before you go, Sahil, do we expect Congress to pick up any threads from this Obama investigation, this release of information from DNI Tulsi Gabbard? Is this something that congressional Republicans in particular may want to seize on?
Unclear right now, Ryan. There hasn't been a huge clamoring to revisit the 2016 election at this time, but the House of Representatives is run by members who are staunch Trump allies. So if he makes enough noise about this, then you could see them going down this path. The issue is that this issue has been investigated many times before, and even prior investigations led by Republicans have confirmed the intelligence that Tulsi Gabbard is now calling a treasonous conspiracy by the Obama administration, confirmed that there was Russian meddling. There's a response that we've seen so far from the top Democrat on the committee, Jim Himes, who called DNI Gabbard's claims baseless, false, and a desperate attempt to change the topic, Ryan.
Yeah, and on the Democratic side, on the Senate side, the Vice Chairman, Democrat Mark Warner, saying she should be removed from that position. All right, Sahil Kapur, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.